Our first speaker, Dr. Peter Sikkema, has been extremely accommodating for us. He just got in late last night and he has to leave right after this talk. So if anybody has questions for him, you can contact him after. His contact information is here and we can get it for you if you need that. So he won't be able to stay much longer than that. So Peter is responsible for weed management and field crops and teaches crop diagnostics and recommendations and herbicide physiology and biochemistry at the University of Guelph at the Ridgetown campus. Peter and his colleagues conduct research on weed management in corn, soybeans, dry beans, and cereals. Of particular interest to local farmers, however, are the current investigations on herbicide resistance. Peter's an excellent source of both practical and innovative solutions for local farmers, and he readily shares his knowledge with primary producers. Peter maintains a busy speaking schedule, obviously, because he's here today again on a very short timeline, sharing his most recent research results at grower meetings and ag conferences. And I do want to put a little plug in. Peter is very graciously coming to Manitoba, bringing his weed science short course to Western Canada for the first time. It's a course he's been running for, I think, 8 years with over 500 participants. I have been very fortunate to take it in London, Ontario. It was an excellent course, but we actually are adapting it for Western Canadian crops and conditions and herbicides. And so that course is going on at the end of February. So Peter will be back in Manitoba for a full week at the end of February. And with that, I will let him give his presentation.
Well, good morning. It's my privilege to be here this morning. And really what I want to do this morning is I just want to share with you our experience with multiple herbicide-resistant water hemp in Ontario. But before I do that, I have 5 or 6 slides just on the biology of water hemp. And the reason why I've included those slides, I want you to have an appreciation of how competitive and how invasive this weed species is. So in terms of the biology of water hemp, just like many other weeds that you would have in Manitoba, water hemp is a summer annual weed that begins its life cycle after the last frost in the spring, and it completes its life cycle before killing frost in the fall. But what makes water hemp so different from other common annual weeds that you would have in Manitoba is that water hemp is a dioecious species, and that simply means you have male and female plants. So just like everybody in this room, none of you look identical to the person sitting beside you. There are no 2 water hemp plants that are genetically identical. And because you have that huge genetic diversity, water hemp biotypes have adapted to our corn and soybean production systems in Ontario, and water hemp has evolved resistance to multiple different herbicide modes of action. In terms of water hemp, it's a prolific seed producer. In a manuscript published by Bob Hartzler et al. In 2024, he documented that one female water hemp plant can produce up to 4.8 million seeds per plant in a non-competitive environment. However, when it's growing in a soybean field, it will produce 300,000 seeds per plant if it emerges at the same time as the soybean. And that's reduced to only 3,000 seeds per plant if it emerges 50 days after soybean planting. In terms of the seed longevity in the soil, water hemp is considered to have short seed longevity in the soil. There's one manuscript in the peer-reviewed literature that says water hemp seed can remain viable in the soil for up to 20 years. However, most manuscripts would conclude that water hemp seed either germinates or rots in the soil within 5 years of being released from the mother plant. Water hemp is described as being a thermophyte that thrives in warm temperatures. It's a hygrophyte that thrives in moderate to moist environments. It's a heliophyte that thrives under high light intensity, and you have reduced growth below the crop canopy. And finally, it's described as being a nitrophilous plant that thrives in nitrogen-rich soils. So this is some research that was completed by the first graduate student that I had that worked on glyphosate-resistant water hemp in Ontario. And what we asked Mike Shriver to do is he went to 2 commercial farms in Ontario. He established permanent quadrats on these farms. He would go out on Monday morning. He would count how many water hemp seeds had emerged in the previous 7 days. Then he would spray off the plot with glufosinate. And then he would go back the next Monday morning to see how many plants came up. So if you look at the slide on the 7 days prior to June 1, it's a logarithmic scale on the y-axis. So about 400 water hemp plants came up per square meter. He burned those off with Liberty, came back the next Monday morning, and there was about 300 plants that came up per square meter. And you'll notice that the third bar graph, there was about 500 plants that came up per square meter in that 7-day period prior to that. What's absolutely amazing about water hemp, you look at the emergence in August. Presumably there was a rain event before the August 22 count, and there was more than 100 water hemp that came up per square meter in August at that time. And in Ontario, water hemp still comes up as late as October 25. So this plant, it begins to emerge after the pre-plant herbicide burn down and no-till, or after the last cultivation for seedbed preparation and conventional till. And it continues to emerge throughout the entire growing season, and that will impact what your weed management program will be on the farm. Water hemp is a very competitive plant. It can grow up to 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch per day. And in our trials, we have water hemp that's over 4 meters tall, right? So that is a picture of Mike Shriver, the first grad student that worked on water hemp in Ontario. Mike's about my height, so a little less than 2 meters. You can see that that water hemp plant is twice Mike's height. That's how tall water hemp will grow in Ontario. So based on research on commercial farms in Ontario, we don't have this weed species on campus where I do my research. So this is all on-farm research. The average yield loss in corn due to water hemp interference was 19%. And in the most competitive environments on the farm, their yield loss is up to 99% if farmers don't implement any weed management tactics to control this weed. And in soybean, the average yield loss was 42%, and in our most competitive environment, the yield loss was 93%. So now I'd like to switch gears and we'll talk about glyphosate-resistant water hemp. In 2014, poor control of water hemp was reported in one field in Lambton County. And I want to say at this point that all of the field shots that you see in my presentation from now on are taken from commercial farms in Ontario. So this is the real deal that these farmers are dealing with. Seed was collected from that field in Lambton County. The plants were grown in the greenhouse, sprayed with glyphosate. And this is what Mike found. So in fields 25 and 27, when it was sprayed with 0.67 liters of glyphosate per acre, obviously those water hemp plants were susceptible to glyphosate. And really disappointing, the seed that he collected from field 21 and 46, you can see they were sprayed with the same rate of glyphosate, and obviously we had discovered glyphosate-resistant water hemp in the province. So in terms of the mechanism of resistance, initially we thought all of the water hemp in Ontario, it was due to an altered target site, and it was a proline to serine amino acid substitution at position 106 of the EPSPS enzyme. However, further research that was done by Julia Kreiner at the University of Toronto, she found that there were some plants in Ontario that had 29 extra copies of the DNA that codes for the EPSPS enzyme, and that confers resistance to the herbicide. So if you're not familiar with gene overexpression, in a normal water hemp plant, you have one strand of DNA that codes for the EPSPS enzyme. You apply glyphosate, which is represented by the red diamonds there. It binds to the enzyme. It stops the shikimate biosynthetic pathway. Aromatic amino acids aren't produced, proteins not produced. That's why weeds die when you spray glyphosate. However, if you have the resistant biotype, notice that there's multiple strands of DNA that code for the EPS-PS enzyme. Glyphosate's still applied, but there's just so much enzyme in the plant. The shikimate biosynthetic pathway functions normally, and you have a resistant plant on the farm. So not only did Mike find that we had group 9 resistant or glyphosate resistant water hemp, it was also resistant to the group 2 herbicide Pursuit. So that makes it challenging for Ontario farmers. And here you'll see that these slides are all from seed collection 22. And it's also resistant to the group 5 herbicide atrazine. So we knew at that time that we had 3-way resistant water hemp in the province. It was resistant to the group 2, 5, as well as 9 herbicides. And I just said that we have group 5 or triazine resistant water hemp. And I think people in extension like myself, we always want to simplify our message so that we can communicate it with your audience. And I'm telling you that this is an oversimplification of what actually happens on the farm. There are 2 mechanisms that confer resistance to the group 5 herbicides. There's enhanced metabolism, as well as an amino acid substitution. And my guess is some of you in the room are saying, well, Peter, why are you bothering us with this information? And I'm going to show you that it changes how you manage this weed on the farm. So if you have enhanced metabolism as the mechanism of resistance on your farm, the resistance is due to elevated levels of a GST enzyme, which confers a high level of resistance to atrazine, but another group 5 herbicide, metribuzin or Sencor, is still effective. So this happens to be Doug Nelson's farm. He farms near Cottam, Ontario, in Ontario. If you read the top of the slide, it says group 5 resistant, metribuzin's a group 5 herbicide. And you can see he gets perfect control on his farm of that group 5 resistant water hemp with a group 5 herbicide. And then we did trials only 100 meters away in corn, and it's a complete failure. So a really legitimate question for you would be is why does one group 5 herbicide work and why does another one fail? And Peter Sikkema just called it a group 5 resistant water hemp. I rarely show chemical structures of herbicides when I do an extension presentation. I am now. Notice that atrazine has a chlorine at the #1 position of the chemical structure of the herbicide. Amazingly, that chlorine atom provides a binding site for glutathione S transferase. Most of you had breakfast this morning. Your digestive system uses enzymes to break down the food that you had for breakfast. Plants do the exact same thing with herbicides. And so that chlorine provides a binding site for an enzyme called glutathione S transferase. It conjugates the herbicide to a 3 amino acid polypeptide. That conjugated herbicide is recognized by ABC transporters, and it just dumps it into the vacuole. It doesn't get to the chloroplast, and you have a resistant plant on the farm, as you can see with the atrazine. So why does Sencor still work, right? Another group 5 herbicide. It's really straightforward. It has an oxygen at the #1 position on that phenyl ring. That doesn't provide a binding site for the enzyme. The herbicide is not conjugated. It's not broken down. It remains active. And you get weed control, all based on the chemical structure of the herbicide. So in terms of water hemp, I said there's a second mechanism of resistance, and it's an amino acid substitution. And it's a serine to glycine amino acid substitution at position 264. And it confers resistance to both atrazine as well as metribuzin. So this is really amazing. Here you can see the same slide. It's Doug Nelson's farm. Atrazine fails if you have the amino acid substitution. This is Tony Stratman's farm, and Sencor fails, right? So I showed you on one farm, Sencor works, the other one it doesn't. It's all based on the mechanism of resistance, and that will determine the cross resistance pattern to these herbicides. So what does this mean on the farm? So if you're the lucky farmer and you have enhanced metabolism on your farm, it does confer resistance to atrazine. You can't use atrazine for water hemp control in corn, but you still can use Sencor for water hemp control in your soybean crop. If you're the unlucky farmer and the mechanism of resistance on your farm is an altered target site, it confers resistance to both atrazine and Sencor, and neither of them will work on the farm. So the next herbicide that we looked at was group 14 resistant water hemp. We looked at 6 different post-emergence group 14 herbicides. They were Blazer, Reflex, Cobra, AIM, Aragon, and Blackhawk. And you can see in the susceptible biotype, all of those herbicides work. And in the collection that we made in 2016, the 7th field that we collected seed from that year, they all failed. So now we knew that we have group 2, 5, 9, and 14 resistant water hemp. And just in the last 18 months, we've released that we have group 27 resistant water hemp. And just like I told you with the group 5s, this is a total oversimplification for me to say it's group 27 resistant. Really interesting. If you have a group 27 resistant water hemp plant on your farm, it confers resistance to the group 27 herbicides applied post, but amazingly, the group 27 herbicides applied prior to water hemp emergence still work. So this happens to be from a farm in Middlesex County in Ontario. This research was done by a graduate student of mine, Hannah Symington. She sprayed the group 27 herbicide Callisto and it failed, right? I mean, that plant has no symptomology. It's growing just fine. It's resistant to the group 5 herbicide atrazine, and it's resistant to the tank mix of Callisto plus atrazine, a group 5 and a group 27. So we asked Hannah to repeat that research, but now just spread seed in the soil and then immediately apply a pre-emergence herbicide. You can see the control, how many plants came up where no herbicide was applied. She applied atrazine, total failure, right? So it's resistant to atrazine applied pre-emergence. I just showed you, though, that Callisto fails post-emergence. This is Callisto applied pre-emergence, and it's 100% control. And then you have the tank mix of the group 5 and the 27, and you can see that it provides 100% control. So what does this mean on the farm? If you have enhanced metabolism as your mechanism of resistance, you can apply Armazon Callisto Law to Shield-X post-emergence, and it's going to fail. However, if you apply the exact same herbicide, Callisto, and you apply it pre-emergence, you can control a group 27 resistant water hemp with a group 27 herbicide just based on the time of application. So this is the most complex profile of multiple herbicide-resistant water hemp that I have in Ontario. This is one farm in Middlesex County in southern Ontario. So this farm, the water hemp on his farm is resistant to the group 2 herbicide Pursuit. It's resistant to the group 5 herbicide Atrazine. It's resistant to the group 5 herbicide Sencor, so obviously it has the serine to glycine amino acid substitution at position 264. It's resistant to the group 9 herbicide glyphosate, the group 14 herbicide lactofen, the group 27 herbicide Callisto, and the tank mix of Callisto plus atrazine. So if you have 5-way resistance on your farm in Ontario and you're growing corn and soybean in rotation, if this is the resistance profile on your farm, 80% of our currently registered herbicides are not going to control this population on the farm. So in terms of the distribution of water hemp in Ontario, It started in Lambton County. Now it's spread from Essex County, adjacent to the Michigan border in the southwest corner of the province, to Glengarry County, adjacent to the Quebec border. It's now confirmed in 17 counties in the province, and of those 17 counties, 7 of them have 5-way resistant water hemp in the province. So based on a survey that I did of the certified crop advisors in Ontario, I know I'm talking to the CCAs in Manitoba. I did a survey of the CCAs in Ontario, and based on what they told me, they think that on 4% of the corn and soybean acres in Ontario, farmers have changed their weed management program because of multiple herbicide-resistant water hemp in the province. So a really legitimate question for you is, why is this an increasing problem in the province of Ontario? And just like there has been in many areas across North America, there's been a trend to reduce strip and no-till crop production, and that favors small-seeded annual broadleaf weeds like water hemp. The water hemp is a dioecious species. That means it has huge genetic diversity. It has adapted to our crop production systems, and it's evolved resistance to many herbicide modes of action. In Ontario, it's evolved resistance to 5 herbicide groups, the group 2, 5, 9, 14, and 27 herbicides. And water hemp is a competitive plant. It's a C4 plant that does well under dry conditions. It has high fecundity or seed production. It has prolonged emergence, as I showed you, and it has seed dormancy anywhere from 5 to 20 years in the soil. So the question is, so how is this biotype moving across the province? And I don't think anybody can tell you exactly how it's moving across the province. I think we can speculate. I took this picture, as you can see, outside of a John Deere dealership in southwestern Ontario. There is no water hemp in the adjacent soybean field, except where he has the cement pad where he cleaned the combine, presumably from another farmer, washed off the cement pad, and now the neighboring farmer has water hemp in his soybean field because somebody brought their combine to be repaired at the John Deere dealership. I took this picture in Lambton County. I think you'd agree with me. My guess is that came in on a contaminated combine. The only place that water hemp's in the field is just along the field edge at the field entry point. This happens to be a field in Huron County. There's a semicircle around the entry point in that field. I'm guessing it came in on contaminated cultivation equipment. This is a field in Haldimand County in Ontario. I can remember chatting with the farmer. He never had water hemp on his farm in his life. The Grand River overflowed its banks. Water hemp, one of the reasons why it's called water hemp is the seed floats in water. And as far as the Grand River overflowed its banks, that's exactly how far he had water hemp on the farm. So this is field edges in Lambton County. Water hemp's been in Ontario for more than a century, but it was never a problem in corn and soybean production fields. Water hemp has evolved so that it is now adapted to our corn and soybean production practices in the province. And the last one, this is a picture of a field in Essex County. Absolutely amazing. Julia Kreiner from the University of Toronto. The water hemp in Essex County in Ontario is almost genetically identical to the water hemp in the state of Missouri. So you say, how did water hemp from the state of Missouri end up in Essex County in southwestern Ontario? Once again, nobody knows, but there's been studies done. It takes 48 hours for a weed seed to go through the digestive tract of migratory birds, and they could easily pick up seed in Missouri, fly for 2 days, and when their droppings may drop water hemp seed in the southwestern part of the province. So anyways, that's it for background information on water hemp. I'm sure you're interested in how do you control this weed. So I'm going to go through strategies for the control of multiple herbicide-resistant water hemp. I do want to stress, I took that picture. That's a commercial soybean field in Ontario. That's not a non-cropped area. That's what this farmer's dealing with. This is a commercial cornfield in Essex County. Anyways, in terms of the competitiveness of this weed, looking at the prices from OMAFRA, the ag stats, the average yield of corn in Ontario from 2018 to 21 was 166 bushels per acre. The average selling price was $5.94 a bushel. So corn in Ontario is worth $986 per acre. This is a farm in Middlesex County. This is the control plot in our experiment. 99% yield loss if the grower didn't implement any weed management tactics on his farm. That's the challenge that Ontario farmers are dealing with. So in terms of looking at herbicide options in corn applied pre-emergence, Callisto plus atrazine provided 86% control. And then Converge, Integrity, and Acuron provided between 89 and 92% control. And I think Integrity is the only one on that slide that's available in the province of Manitoba. So just to show you what it looked like in one of our experiments, there's the control plot. And Acuron provided 92% control. That's pretty impressive control. And that farm has 5-way resistant water hemp, right? So this isn't taking a population that's not too aggressive. And that was the control. Anyways, one of the questions I get from Ontario farmers, what about Acuron Flexi? It doesn't have atrazine in it. Even though it's a group 5 resistant water hemp, you're still getting a bump in control by adding atrazine in Acuron compared to Acuron Flexi. So looking at water hemp control with Acuron, which I think is the best starting point to manage it in corn, in 28% of our experiments, Acuron gave 100% control. Then in another 50%, it gave between 90 and 99% control. So 78% of the time, this herbicide is providing greater than 90% control of water hemp. But then 8% of the time it was in the 80s, 6% it was in the 70s, 6% it was in the 60s, and 3% of the time it was in the 50s. So a really legitimate question for you could be is, why does a herbicide provide such variable control in the field, right? And I think it's the best starting point for managing multiple herbicide-resistant water hemp in corn. And all of you, you're all CCAs, you all realize weed management with herbicides is variable. It just is. Nobody should guarantee weed control with a herbicide. I worked for 3 of the herbicide manufacturers before I went to the University of Guelph. And so weed control with Acuron is variable from field to field and year to year due to, and probably the most important reason is rainfall for activation after a soil-applied herbicide. It is influenced by soil characteristics. You have reduced weed control on heavy textured soils with high organic matter and cation exchange capacity. And you get reduced control on low pH soils. It's obviously going to be influenced by the weed resistance profile, weed density, time of weed emergence, and finally, competitiveness of the crop. So now we'll move on to post-emergence herbicides. And you can see that Callisto, Converge, Shieldex, Acuron, Lotus, Armazon, and then Acuron, instead of Acuron Flexi, they provided 91 to 96% control. And I think you'd look at that slide and say, wow, we got some really good options for managing water hemp post-emergence in corn. Guess what? Every herbicide I've listed there is a group 27. And I just told you that group 27 herbicides applied post-emergence don't work. So these are the best herbicides to control water hemp post in corn. But if you're the unlucky farmer and have group 27 resistant water hemp, none of the herbicides there are going to work. So just to show you what it looked like in the field, this is the control plot, and Lotus plus atrazine provided 94%. I think if whenever I do an extension talk in Ontario, if you have water hemp on the farm as a grower, you have to plan to pass weed control program. I think you start with your best soil applied herbicide and then you manage the weed escapes if there are any escapes. So Converge as well as Acuron in this trial provided 90 to 98% control. And then we came back with Liberty post-emergence and the control was 97 to 99%. Or you could use Prime Extra or Integrity Soil Applied. They provided 94 and 97%. And then come back with a group 27. We chose Callisto. You could use Lotus in Manitoba. And you can see the control was 99%. So in terms of control of water hemp in corn, I think you have to be prepared to use a 2-pass weed control program of a soil applied herbicide followed by a post. And I think you as a grower have to choose whether you're going to put your group 27 down as your soil applied or post emergence. We don't want to apply them twice in one growing season. So here I've used my group 27 herbicide soil applied and came back with Liberty post emergence, or you could do just the reverse. And you could use not a group 27 soil applied, and you could use Integrity or Prime Extra, and then come back with any one of the post-emergence group 27 herbicides. So now I'll switch gears and talk about water hemp control in soybean. Once again, this is a commercial soybean field in Ontario. I remember taking the picture. That's the density that some Ontario farmers are dealing with. Obviously, this grower didn't realize the resistance profile on his farm and was really disappointed when I took that picture, let's say sometime in late August in Ontario. Anyways, in terms of a soybean, the average yield is 49 bushels per acre. The average selling price was $13.59, so it's worth $672 an acre. In our most competitive environment, all of this research is done on the farm, none of it on the research station. You can see our highest yield loss was 93%. So there's a potential loss of $625 an acre if Ontario farmers don't change their weed management practices. So in terms of the pre-emergence herbicides, the ones that are the most efficacious include Authority Supreme, Bifecta, Triactor, and Volterra. They gave 80 to 83% control. And the best herbicide is Fierce, and you can see it provided 90% control. I think Fierce is the best starting point to manage multiple herbicide-resistant water hemp and soybean. The next thing I will tell you, it has the smallest margin of crop safety. Boy, if you have a cold, wet spring, Fierce can really set back your soybean crop. Anyways, this is one of the trials. You can see the weedy check, and boy, that's impressive weed control with Fierce. Obviously, in that trial, it provided greater than 90% control, but on average in our trials, it provides 90% control. So just like in corn, if you have water hemp on your farm and you're planning to grow soybean, I think you have to be prepared to use a 2-pass weed control program. If you're growing identity preserved or Roundup Ready soybean, you could start with something like Boundary or Authority Supreme, and then you come back post-emergence with a group 14 herbicide like Blazer or Reflex, and the control was anywhere between 98 and 100%. In terms of Extend soybean, this is research that was done by Brittany Hedges. She had Zidua, Authority Supreme, Boundary, and Fierce applied pre-emergence. And then she followed it with a Roundup Extend post-emergence, and the control was 96 to 99%. And here's some of the pictures from that research. There's Authority Supreme by itself. That's not acceptable. And you follow it with a post-application of Roundup Extend, and it's near perfect control. And finally, in E3 soybean, in this research, we started with Boundary, Authority Supreme, or Fierce. They provided 83 to 95% control. And you come back with Enlist Duo applied post-emergence, and the control was 99%. So this is an experiment that was done on Walpole Island. There you can see the water hemp after the application of Roundup. So it's obviously glyphosate resistant, and a 2-pass program of boundary and enlist followed by enlist and near perfect control of the water hemp. So just like I told you in corn, I think in soybean, you have to do the same thing. You have to be prepared to use a 2-pass program of a soil-applied herbicide followed by a post-emergence herbicide. In terms of the soil-applied herbicides, I think Fierce provides the best control, but you have the greatest potential for soybean injury. And then other herbicides you could use are Volterra, Triactor, Bifecta, or Authority Supreme. In terms of post-emergence and identity preserved and Roundup Ready soybean, you have to come back with a group 14 like Blazer or Reflex. In E3 soybean, you can come back post-emergence with Enlist 1, Enlist Duo, or Liberty. And in Extend Flex soybean, you can come back with either Ingenia, XtendiMax, or Liberty. And all of those programs will provide quite good control of multiple herbicide-resistant water hemp in soybean. So the question is does management matter? And so here you're going to have to totally trust me, but I'm standing in one spot. I take out my camera, I turned, and I'm facing south where I took this picture. I know this field, it has 5-way resistant water hemp. There's soybean underneath that water hemp. That's the density in one field. And I turned my body 180 degrees, and that farmer obviously figured out how to manage 5-way resistant water hemp. And that's the point I want to make sure I leave you with is this is a manageable problem. Farmers need to be aware of it, and they need to adjust their weed management programs accordingly. So in terms of herbicide stewardship, Stephen Powles from the University of Western Australia says, cropping systems diversity is the foundation for resistance management. So your CCAs, so what should farmers do? And I say they should proactively introduce more diversity into their crop and weed management programs. I think they have to implement a diverse crop rotation on the farm, use tillage at strategic points in that rotation, plant in narrow rows where that makes sense, such for us, it would be soybean. Instead of planting in 30-inch rows, they could be 15 or 7-inch rows. Plant cover crops after winter wheat combining, possibly purchase a combine with harvest weed seed control, and finally, utilize multiple herbicide modes of action over time. So I just told you what I think Ontario farmers should do. So now I'm putting my credibility on the line, and I'm trying to implement that in 2 studies on commercial farms in Ontario. So this happens to be in Lambton County. You can see that there's winter wheat in the foreground, there's corn right behind it. And then to the right-hand side there, there's soybean. So what we did is we set up experiments on 2 farms. The goal of this research was to deplete the number of water hemp seeds in the seed bank by 95% using weed management practices that can be implemented on most commercial farms in the province without them having to buy any new piece of equipment, right? So we're not trying to do off-the-wall things. We're trying to do things that every farmer in the province could do. So the length of the study is 6 years. We did it on 2 farms where the number of water hemp seeds in the seed bank per acre when the study was initiated was, this is going to shock you. And so at the Cottam site, there was 165 million water hemp seeds in the seed bank per acre when we started the study. And on Walpole Island, it was about 1/10 of that. There were 16 million seeds in the seed bank. So on these 2 farms, we set up 5 different rotations. It was continuous soybean, 2 crop rotation of corn, soybean, 2 crop rotation of soybean and wheat, a 3 crop rotation of corn, soybean, and wheat. And the most complex one was where we planted a cover crop after winter wheat combining. We had 2 soybean row widths, either 15 or 30-inch rows. And across the three crop rotation, we used up to 8 different herbicide modes of action. So the control plot for this study on these 2 farms is continuous soybean. The only herbicide applied is Roundup. And this is what it looked like on one of the farms, not surprising. It is glyphosate-resistant Waterhemp. And so then we had continuous soybean, but instead of using Roundup, we applied Fierce pre-emergence and then Roundup Extend post-emergence, and we reduced the row width from 30 to 15 inches. And you can see that's pretty nice control, even in a continuous soybean production system. Not that we would recommend it, but we did it because for research purposes. Then we had a 2 crop rotation of soybean and corn. And you can see we now have 6 different herbicide modes of action over the 2 years. Then we had a 2 crop rotation of soybean and wheat. And now there's 8 different herbicide modes of action. And in the 3 crop rotation of corn, soybean, wheat, and cover crop, there's 8 different herbicide modes of action over a 3-year period. So here you can see the control in corn, soybean, and winter wheat. And so using your herbicides judiciously, wow, you can get pretty nice weed control. This is the difference between planting a cover crop after winter wheat combining and not. So there's no cover crop on the left, and then you can see the oat and oilseed radish cover crop on the right. So we looked at Waterhemp ground cover on September 1st. And you can see that where we had continuous soybean, the only herbicide used was glyphosate. There was 79% ground covered by Waterhemp, not surprising. Notice though, the other 5 treatments, the continuous soybean, the 2 crop rotations, and the 3 crop, the Waterhemp cover on September 1 was less than 1%. So these different strategies that we established on those farms in Ontario was working out really well. And our interest was to look at the depletion of Waterhemp seed in the seed bank, where we had continuous soybean and only sprayed Roundup. There was an increase, as you would expect, of the number of seeds in the seed bank. It went up by 31%. After 3 years of doing the things that I just mentioned, the number of seeds in the seed bank decreased by about 60%, as you can see here. This actually worked out better than what I thought it would when we initiated that research on those 2 farms in Ontario. So I think if Ontario farmers plan their crop and weed management programs, this is a manageable problem on Ontario farms. And so the number of seeds in the seed bank decreased from 165 to 30 million seeds after only 3 years of following a really rigorous crop and weed management program. So this is the second farm where we have this trial. This happens to be the Cottam site. And you can see those plots, they're pretty clean where we use this quite rigorous weed management program. So in closing, I do want to thank all of the graduate students that work with me. I've had 21 graduate students, if you can believe it, work on glyphosate-resistant weeds in the province of Ontario. I'm sure we published more than 100 peer-reviewed manuscripts. I simply wouldn't have had the data this morning to share with you if it wasn't for their hard work. And I want to thank the grain farmers of Ontario for supporting our research, the herbicide manufacturers, as well as federal and provincial programs. And I want to leave you with this thought. I wished I had thought of this, but it's from Andrew Niss from University of Wyoming. And he says, at some point, we need to stop looking to herbicides as a solution to a problem created by herbicides. And I will just repeat what I said. We got to use every weed management tactic we can to manage these populations. So thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed being here. If you have any questions at all, I am more than happy to try to address them.
Thanks so much, Peter. That was an excellent talk. I'm sure we have lots of questions. We're going to take one from the internet community because we haven't done that in a while.
Okay, so the question here is the approach in Ontario for controlling resistant water hemp solely relying on herbicide, or are there recommendations or work looking at cultural or mechanical control methods and incorporating those into on-farm water hemp management? What's the risk and likelihood of developing additional group 27 and group 5 resistance if those groups are all growers are relying on?
Yeah, and so exactly what I just showed at the end of my presentation. So maybe they put that question in before I had the last 10 slides. And yeah, I think farmers have to introduce way more diversity into their crop and weed management programs. And so they have to use every weed management tactic at their disposal, whether that's tillage, whether that's cover crops, whether that's harvest, weed, seed control. I think we got to use every possible weed management tactic, and we got to do it proactively. We got to do it before the problem arises rather than waiting for the problem to arise.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions from the floor? Mike has one.
Yeah, Peter, Mike Gurney from Gowan. Just want to get your thoughts on using Edge as a soil residual application in label crops, canola and soybean with an alternate mode of action.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, that would be one component. And if I compare the soil applied grass herbicides, and I want to stress, I'm speaking from a guy from Ontario. I don't claim to be an expert in Manitoba at all, so I want to put that right out there. If you look at the soil applied grass herbicides and contributing to the control of water hemp or small seeded annual broadleaf weeds, I think the dinitroanilins, the group 3 herbicides, man, in our situation in Ontario, they are super good on lamb's quarters, and they will suppress pigweed. I'll say that right away. In contrast to that, though, and just the way it works out in biology, the group 15 herbicide, so dual frontier Zidua, it flips, and they provide greater suppression of water hemp than the dinitroanilins. And so the choice of your soil applied grass herbicide is going to be dependent on the weed spectrum in each individual field. But it's going to contribute, Mike. I'm not disputing that at all.